I want to, first of all, thank everyone. As I think it's pretty evident over today and yesterday's conversation, the world is really poised at a very dramatic, transformative moment. And that's really going to shape the future of long-term prosperity for every human being. And this panel is going to confront that moment as we discuss how do we create value from our natural resources and our energy positions. In the past few years, we have seen tremendous transformations and upheaval in energy markets. If you just look at a nation like mine, the United States, in less than a decade, we've moved from a position of energy scarcity to one of energy abundance and energy strength. And yet, as we look around the world, we see other nations that are struggling to understand how can they leverage their own natural resources and energy portfolio to drive long-term productivity, long-term prosperity, increases in standard of living. And the horizon hints at even larger changes and transformations. And we have to deal with those and confront those as to how we not only use energy, but how do we create energy? And how do we share that in an inclusive, just way? So let's just imagine for a moment, as we set up this panel's conversation with experts, what is the world going to look like in 10 to 20 years? Well, first of all, as we've heard many times before, explosion of population, up to 9 billion by the year 2040. That explosion in population is going to drive energy demand in ways which we are yet able to confront, but we're going to try to today. We see tremendous electrification around the world, and this is being driven in places like India and China, which are really bringing on, for the first time, many of the appliances and conveniences that we are all very accustomed to and have taken for granted in some way. But we also see a tremendous shift in other ways, and some of the panels this morning even addressed that. Digitization of our economy. If you look at these little devices, but all the other smart devices that we don't see in our lives, projections are that by the year 2030, all of those smart connected devices could consume up to 50% of global energy. That is clearly not sustainable. Do you want to give up your smart device, or do you want to be able to wash your clothes? Would you like air conditioning, or do you want to be able to access your Uber app? We may have to face those choices in the years to come if we don't find sustainable ways to really use our energy. So we face a tremendous amount of change and transformation. I'm really going to now turn to our panel to really help address a series of key questions. How can any company or any nation face this future? How can we work together to solve some of these problems, but also really, I would say, achieve some of the opportunity space? And how is this going to play out in different regions across the world? As you'll come to learn, this panel represents a really interesting snapshot of the global economy. And then finally, we're going to talk about one last topic. I hope we get a chance, but if time permits. The technological changes, the innovations that we've been talking about for the past day and a half are moving at a pace that is unprecedented in global history. What we also know, however, is that policy change tends to underpace or lag behind that technological change. How do we begin to flip that dynamic? Are there ways that we can actually empower our policy leaders to keep pace with that technological innovation change? I think some of the experts here on stage with me will be able to help us address that question as well. So I'm going to actually now turn to the experts. I'm going to turn first to Bill Bohnett. Bill is the president of Whitecap Investment Advisors. We're also lucky at the U.S. Council. Bill is on our board and executive committee. Bill, you were just fresh off the plane from California and the Global Climate Action Summit. Can you help provide maybe a macro snapshot? Where are we in the world post-Paris? What are some of the challenges and opportunities we face? And how did you come out of California? Optimistic, pessimistic, neutral?
Optimistic, Chad. The Global Climate Action Summit took place last week in San Francisco. 325 affiliate events, over 5,000 participants, hundreds of reports and action plans, with a bottom-up focus on meeting the Paris climate change commitments. For this conference, what are the chief takeaways, the central messages of that conference? Number one, first and foremost, there's no going back. The transition to a global low-carbon economy has begun, endorsed by 189 countries. Where are we? In football terms, perhaps the 25th minute of a 90-minute game, with a tie score at best at present. against a 2050 goal of no net carbon emissions. Losing the game is not meeting that goal, and I should add that present U.S. federal government policy is probably costing all of us about 4 minutes of that 90-minute game. But it should be noted that the U.S. is still on track to meet up to 70% of its 2030 goals, despite Washington's current posture. What then is a competitive, innovative energy economy? It is, in fact, a country that's committed to meeting its Paris goals, not simply providing coal-fired energy at the lowest current cost without recognizing more sustainable solutions. World energy production, as has been noted, was still 38% coal-fired in 2016. However, solar and wind are rapidly declining in cost. They're down 86% and 67% respectively over the last 10 years. With that background, what does energy innovation mean? How can sustainable energy businesses be built? I talk about 5 key points. Number one, we have to have supportive government policies, carbon pricing, cap and trade systems, fossil fuel subsidy elimination, and carbon taxes. 2, we need more efficient buildings and appliances. The top need is for better government policies to achieve a 30% improvement in building efficiency by 2030. That would include mandatory building codes and more stringent energy and appliance efficiency standards. 3, energy finance. Greater attention needs to be paid to disclosure of risks and the stranded assets and stranded jobs problem for a coal plant phase out. And next, replication of India's very good example of upfront financing for energy efficient equipment. 4, managing intermittency. With solar and wind expanding rapidly at the grid level, we have a significant need for greatly increased investment in smart grid technology and energy storage. And 5, what will getting to 100% wind, water, and solar by 2050 mean? It will require massive increases in residential and rooftop solar plants, concentrated solar plants or CSPs, onshore wind, and offshore wind. What then does scaling innovative, sustainable solutions require? Many things, but I'll focus on just 2. Capital investment needs, of course, are enormous. To fully unlock the private sector, what do we need? What does this planet need? This old lawyer says, capital requires that the attributes of doing business easily and more efficiently really need to see incremental, constant improvement within a country and across countries in the business ease of doing business indicators. That would include really paying attention to, for a plug out for us, the GFTC's Competitiveness Decoder, which is an important tool for unlocking business success and creation. And next, blended financing models will be needed. We'll need new ways of thinking about financing all this investment. That would include concessional debt, public-private partnerships, and more innovative orientation of state-owned enterprises. Finally, among the best opportunities for innovative, scalable businesses are distributed small and medium-scale solar. Solar home systems, solar mini and microgrids. Off-grid solar markets are expanding rapidly. The IEA mini grids offer a U.S. $300 billion investment opportunity before 2030. New business models using mobile phones and mobile money are proliferating. Pay-as-you-go systems for solar installation are rapidly expanding across Africa, 50% year over year in some countries. And finally, 2 examples. As to the 2.3 billion in the planet who don't have access to clean cooking, Brazil offers a very good example. 3-pronged approach. Build out of national infrastructure for LNG deployment, private entrepreneurial-driven market creation, and subsidies to the poorest. And finally, a good example of an innovative solution to address the needs of 700 million without access to the grid is Little Sun. That's littlesun.com, which provides low and no-cost solar to the poorest in Africa.
Bill, thank you for that global macro. You've actually laid out a series of issues. And the way we're going to move in this transition, this panel, I'm going to turn next to Jim and ID to give us some, I would say, some national snapshots. But before we do that, are there any reactions from the panel to some of the industrial changes that Bill is hinting at that we need to see? Would anyone like to chime in before we go deeper into the conversation? Elena?
Okay. Well, yes, Chad, I think that there's, good morning, everybody, first of all. And definitely there's changes that we can see in the industry because, as we've been discussing before, we move from extractive industry-dominated energy market to possibly an energy market that being sustainable will come from a different source. So probably we're moving from the subsurface to the surface. And that, of course, since the subsurface energy industry does have a very strong regional implication, that shift will possibly change the geopolitics of energy across the world. So it's not only the technicality of how the industry changes, but it's also the geography of how this industry changes.
Elena, that's a perfect transition for us because, Jim, I'd like to turn to you first. Jim Metzen, Vice President of Research, University of Auckland, to talk maybe a little bit about what Elena just hinted at, the geographical drivers, the changes that you're foreseeing in New Zealand. You know, you're an island nation. How do you react to her response? And then, ID, we're going to turn to you, to Malaysia, which I think will have a very different perspective.
I think there are a couple of common themes across, and that is that the future, including for us as an island nation, is increasingly electric and increasingly green. New Zealand, as it currently stands, our electricity market, we're more than 80% renewables as it currently stands, based on hydro, geothermal and wind, with a very small solar component. And that will be pushed further over time. On the other hand, we are 100% dependent on imported liquid fuels for our transport fleet, and that is where the major transition is going to need to be. If we look at what the disruptors are for a country like New Zealand, we've followed other countries in regulating net zero carbon by 2050, and that actually prompts a dramatic shift in the way that our energy market works. It is very much electric and electric vehicles. If we look at then the difference between our behaviour and our aspiration, the social problem, right as it currently stands, I think 1 in 37 vehicles purchased in New Zealand, new vehicles, is electric. So we have the social gap between our aspirations and our behaviour, which is significant. The other issues that we face is that if we go electric in that way, it dramatically increases the demand on that electricity grid and the flexibility that you need in an electricity grid. Now, as an island nation, we cannot trade, at least with current technology, we cannot trade electricity across our borders. So we are completely dependent on what we are able to do internally in that sense. It does mean there are options. For example, we have an aluminium smelter which parallels Australia in that it consumes about 13% of our electric power in New Zealand makes aluminium. And I would actually point out that about 4% of electricity globally, as we sit here, is making aluminium. This is a very big number. Now, in New Zealand, we could close that aluminium smelter. That's a good solution locally and a very poor solution globally, because it would then shift that production capacity to fossil fuel or hydrocarbon-based plants elsewhere in the world. So the difference, again, between a local solution being out of step with a global solution. I'd also look at what is the role in particular of universities. Coming from a university, I look at, well, what do we need to do differently? As the universities do two things, basically. We produce people, knowledgeable, skilled graduates, we hope, and we produce knowledge itself. Now, we're going to have to do better in both spheres, I think, and that those graduates are going to have to be much better lateral thinkers than we have been to address the challenges of smart grids, of a much more dynamic energy environment. We need some other technical solutions. Earlier this morning, the cost of energy storage was mentioned in terms of the steadily reducing, escalating cost of storage. The elephant in the room is very quickly going to become recycling of those energy storage materials, because that will be something that we will face much more quickly than we think. The other thing is the social problem that I raised earlier, and that our behaviours actually have to change, and we need the thinkers who are going to lead that social change around energy, as well as the technical solutions that we need. And I guess I'd leave it there, Chair.
Great, Jim. Thank you. So Adid Shita here, Chief Strategy Officer, Petronas Technological University. Paint a different picture for us, because I think it will be different. Malaysia compared to New Zealand. Massive transition to renewables. Where is Malaysia today? Where do you see it headed? And what are some of the challenges and opportunities you all are facing as you think about your future energy strategy?
All right. Thank you, Chad and James. First, in due respect to our Argentinian host, I would like to say buenos dias, gracias por invitarme a este foro. Lo siento, pero mi español no es muy bueno, por lo tanto me hablo inglés. Muchas gracias. I would first like to introduce a bit more on my current organization, University Technology Petronas, known colloquially as UTP. We are a small private university established in 1997 by Petronas, the national company, resource owner, and regulator for the oil and gas industry in Malaysia. So we're all three in one. We own the resource, we're also a private company, and we also regulate the oil and gas industry in Malaysia. Now, we set up UTP back in 1997 with three goals in mind. First, to ensure the availability of strong engineering graduates. Two, to provide affordable tertiary education in engineering for all Malaysians, irrespective of their ethnicity, religious beliefs, or gender. And now, since we are an international company, also to all of our host nations. And number three, to ensure that the engineering graduates that are produced and available in these countries, including Malaysia, espouse the Petronas' shared values of integrity and professionalism. So that's the reason why we invest in the university in the first place. Today, UTP has about 6,000 students. They receive about 60% funding for Petronas and also staff technical support. I myself am actually from the Petronas Corporate Planning Division, but currently attached to the university as a staff there. So now, with respect to Malaysia, as I've pointed out to you, we are very, very different. In fact, as the Petronas is the oil and gas regulator of Malaysia, we see the transition and change towards renewables, towards decarbonization, towards competitive price renewables, and we welcome it actually. For Petronas, we have two functions in life. As the regulator, I have to ensure a sustainable energy industry and sustainable industry that employs people in the nation, not just in Malaysia, but in all of our host nations. We see that in regions where fossil fuels remain competitive at competitive prices and in abundance, these regions will continue to use oil and gas. The question that we have to answer to ourselves is, how do I ensure the availability of such gas at such resources at competitive prices, in other words, keeping costs down? How do I ensure the accessibility of those gas to customers, especially the poorest customers in the region? And how do I ensure that such customers use this resource in a responsible manner? Obviously, it may not be in a sustainable manner, given the fact that the depletion of oil and gas resources is greater than its creation currently. But how do I use it in a responsible manner given its detrimental effects to the environment? We cannot deny the fact that the emissions of CO2 causes global warming. As an engineer, we have to accept that fact. The question is, how do I ensure our customers understand that and use it in a responsible manner? Use it for their needs, not for their indulgence or exuberance. So now, within Petronas and within UTP itself, currently our focus areas are like in CO2 management, carbon dioxide management, enhanced oil recovery, field decommissioning to ensure that our environments, the seas, are not polluted with our activities within that. Within Malaysia itself right now, we are struggling and transiting from previously an oil and gas-based economy, with respect to energy generation, towards more renewable energy generation. We do have hydrocarbon, we do have hydroelectric in fair abundance, but when it comes to solar and wind, we are still very, very small. In fact, what is not well known within the industry is that Petronas has the largest solar generation plants in Malaysia, actually, even though we are an oil and gas entity. But where we differ a lot from New Zealand is because of the way our energy structures have started. Our markets, we used to have a predominantly single entity for electricity generation. Our oil and gas markets are still in very infant, being held primarily by Petronas. Issues of market access, for example, liberal markets, decentralized markets, market pricing and fair market pricing is still at its infancy stages right now. And this will take time for us in Malaysia. It's not something, what we've learned over time is that nations and societies take time to transition from one area to the next. This transition cannot happen instantly. And if you ask, I think anyone in the world, we all want a future better for our children. That's something that we share common throughout as a human species. We all look forward for the future of our children. So to ask anyone to say, regress 20 or 30 years down, back to a certain age where you have less access to affordable energy for the sake of, say, the environment currently, the general answer will be no. So my question, the challenge that we face as an energy regulator is how do I make that transition for these people as painlessly as possible and as smoothly as possible. So we see great opportunities both in the current areas of fossil fuel production, both in current areas of environmental management within the fossil fuel landscape, and also in the new renewable energy spaces. For example, we do research in biomass, but not the type of biomass that is done in Europe, for example. We emphasize more on secondary and third generation biomass, or the conversion of tropical-based biomass into usable energy feedstocks or usable chemicals. An area, for example, that if you look in literature review, is somewhat lacking today. So that's how we see Malaysia in our environment.
Eddie, thank you. Well, you ended on a technological point, which will help us transition to Ernesto, but I have to ask a question to you and Jim, because you both went to a place I wasn't expecting in a similarity. Jim, you mentioned a social gap. You know, only 1 in 37 are actually buying that electric vehicle. You mentioned you have to help shape consumers and how they think about the use of energy. Can you maybe both share really quickly an opportunity that you see as you think about behavioral change and in your own economies, and where Jim, how do you get that to 15 out of 37 are buying that electric vehicle, and how do you help make that transition to needing to use this resource you have, and yet you want to go even beyond that?
You can go the heavyweight approach, I think, which is government incentive around vehicles. You simply make it a more palatable economic option. But in terms of social change, actually, also it's decision making in younger people, particularly, who have really a different value set and aspiration than perhaps our generation have had, and getting that shift in social consciousness, I think, is certainly possible and is moving that way already. It just, as my colleague has said, it takes time for these transitions to bed in.
Adit, how do you see it? I mean, you're both at universities, so you've got your pulse on the future generations and both your economies.
Yes, well, in Malaysia, as some of you may know, we recently had an election. So in fact, it's very interesting. We finally, after 60 years of independence from the United Kingdom, we have a change in government. And one of the reasons why is because in Malaysia today, the younger generations of 20-year-olds are really in charge of the political landscape of Malaysia, even though we have a prime minister who's 93 years old. So that's one interesting anomaly that we have in Malaysia today. But what we find, the younger generation, they are more willing to embrace the environment. They are willing to embrace environmental care. So that makes my life a lot easier to introduce these concepts of sustainability. The younger generation are willing to take the financial leap and the leap in faith towards protecting the environment. And I think that is a great sign for those of us. The question for us, both as the company and also as UTP, how do I then shape the minds of the younger generations along that path, but to also ensure that there are other people who don't fall behind as a result of their policies.
Great, thank you both. And Ernesto, I'd like to turn to you now. Dr. Ernesto Calvino, Senior Scientific Research in CAMAI and CONICET here in Argentina. Adit ended his formal presentation on a technological note. Could you maybe share with the panel and the audience your perspectives on future opportunities in the technological space? Where do you see some advantages here in Argentina? And what makes this place distinctive and special in the global supply chain?
Yes, the message I would like to convey to you this morning is how to create wealth from innovation, from science and technology, so to speak, knowledge society. And I will focus on lithium technologies, which would enable sustainable, intermittent, renewable energies. I met Stephen Chu 2 weeks ago in Italy. You know, he's been as a former Secretary of Energy of the Obama administration and Nobel laureate. And he said something very interesting. At 2 cents per kilowatt hour, the problem is not energy. The problem is storage. So lithium and hydrogen are key elements to take into consideration. So I guess that many people here have these non-smart gadgets. And I quote what Guillermo said before, the telephone is not smart, but it took very many smart, very smart people to develop these telephones. They have changed completely the way we communicate. These are computers now, and this is because of lithium. It's the concept of energy density, high energy density, a lot of energy in small mass that could make smaller and smaller devices with more and more apps. That market has already saturated, though it's very important. Now comes the electric vehicle, and this is a big explosion. The battery of a Tesla S car is equivalent to 15,000 mobile phones. This is the change, the challenge in the extraction of lithium. But also there is another market, and this is remote electrification. South America alone has 30 million people off grid. This is an unsatisfied market of 7.5 gigawatt hour. Okay? I will give you 2 examples. One, sustainable extraction of lithium using the same electrochemical principles that we use in a mobile phone battery. And the other one is using lithium to get ammonia for fertilizers within the value chain of lithium hydroxide, which today is $20,000 per metric ton. So lithium can be extracted from hard rock, like in Australia, green forest, or from continental brines, like in South America or Clayton Valley in Nevada. South America, in the south of Bolivia, north of Chile, and northwest of Argentina, has 85% of all lithium resources from natural brine. So we have designed a process that uses a battery technology to extract the lithium in an electrochemical reactor. This is fast, it is clean, it's low in energy consumption because it's a battery, therefore half of the process produces energy. Obviously, we have not been able to overcome the second law of thermodynamics yet. And it's also very selective. And now we are developing the engineering and scaling it up. Now, on the other hand, 150 million metric tons of ammonia are produced per year worldwide. And this production consumes 1% of all energy that is produced in the world, but has a carbon trade, because hydrogen to produce ammonia comes from reforming, okay? Therefore, we think that since lithium, it's one of the few, or probably the only element that breaks nitrogen molecule at room temperature and pressure, we are working in a disruptive process to use the lithium that we have in the northwest of Argentina, in this region of the lithium triangle. Not only lithium, but also we have premium solar energy, 2,600 kilowatt hour per square meter, comparable to Arizona or to Sahara. Okay, so we have two great things, solar energy and lithium. Now we can use this lithium to break nitrogen, make ammonia for fertilizers, and I don't have to explain that in a country like Argentina this is important, and then obtain as a byproduct lithium hydroxide, which now is taking over lithium carbonate. What are the opportunities for investment? Well, let me give you a figure of merit. We need to export in Argentina 1.5 metric ton of lithium carbonate to buy a single battery for a Tesla S car. Okay, so this is an important thing, that we have to add value. We need to add value with public-private consortia, and we need to have public strategic policies to foster investment. We ourselves are now spinning off a Lithium company, Lithium is Argentine Lithium, to accomplish this goal. Take the case of Chile. Chile offers preferential price for those who want to add value in the country, and they have already achieved that 2 Asian companies and a Chilean company are projecting to manufacture battery cathodes in Chile. Albemarle and SQM, the 2 largest companies in the world to produce lithium, are providing $25 million to the Lithium Research Center in Antofagasta. And these companies pay 40% royalty, above $10 per kilogram of lithium carbonate. The other example is Bolivia and Germany have a strategic partnership in lithium. Bolivia offers lithium and Germany offers technology and markets. So this is very, very nice marriage. We have a lithium research center in Palpalá. One of my former students, Victoria Flexer, it's leading that project. But we have to create highly qualified jobs in the labor market. Now, I have to tell you, as an Argentine scientist, the frustration of Argentine scientists with the downgrading of the Ministry of Science to a Secretary of the Education Ministry in Argentina. And I think this is a big mistake, because at the same time, Chile is creating the Ministry of Science, Brazil has a Ministry of Science, and it's a very bad message to young people that are going to leave the country. So I hope that our politicians and our government rethink this idea and take, as we thought it was, a state policy in the previous administration and in the present administration of keeping a Ministry of Science. This is my message to the audience.
Message heard, loud and clear. But Ernesto, before I move to Elena for a comment, if you were really quick, and I hope that you could do this, you mentioned this incredible triad, lithium, solar, fertilizer. That is a national strategic asset, that pyramid. If you had to create a public-private partnership to really optimize that system for advantage here in Argentina, industry creation, job creation, what would be your top recommendation?
The top recommendation would be to have a state policy in the long run, independently of who runs the administration, and to base on education, science, and technology as the key factor to overcome all the problems Argentina is facing. I was in Israel when the Ministry of Science was downgraded in Argentina, and my friends couldn't believe what I told, because even in the worst situation, in the middle of a war, they never gave up science and technology.
Okay, good point. Elena Mortini, Geoscience Advisor at YPF for the B20 process. We've talked a lot about national systems for innovation, macro global overview, some technological opportunities, but at the end of the day, people innovate. And in this space of energy, natural resources, we also know that there are not necessarily great engagement or just engagement of people in this process. Can you talk a little bit about talent, people who are going to be producing and consuming all of these resources and these wonderful things that we've been talking about?
Sure. It's actually a fascinating topic, that of having a human-centered policy whenever we discuss about energy and innovation. I represent here today the B20, which is the affinity group of business to the G20. I think we all know about G20 and B20 and all the process that especially Argentina has been experiencing in 2018. And our task as the Business 20 was in the task force of energy, resource efficiency and sustainability, was indeed that of putting forward recommendations to the G20 governments. And I actually hope that as B20 we have gathered many of the recommendations that you've put forward. And before answering specifically the topic that Chad is proposing, which is of paramount importance, which is, again, being human-centered throughout this process, let me just briefly summarize which are the 5 main recommendations that we've put forward to the G20. The first one, well, in general, we're talking about energy transitions. In plural, this term has been actually sort of invented this year from the Argentinian presidencies, because it is recognized that energy matrix are different according to different countries. So we need to allow transitions in a plural sense to move forward towards a low carbon future. So our main 5 topics were accelerating energy transitions towards a low carbon future, concentrating on energy efficiency, so anything that could foster policies in terms of energy efficiency, which, by the way, let me say that we all think that dialogue is one of the best means towards energy efficiency. The third point was energy access, so guaranteeing that the Sustainable Development Goal number 7, that guarantees access to everybody, was taken into important account. Resource efficiency and circular economy was our 4th pillar. Circular economy is a very important topic because we need to abandon the take, make, dispose paradigm to move to a real upcycle and recycling of resources. And the last one, of course, was, last one not in terms of importance, but the last topic was climate mitigation and adaptation policies. So going back to Chad's topic, there was an absolute consensus among the 160 companies that the B20 Energy represented on the fact that these transitions need to take into account human beings. And as Bill said at the beginning, nobody need or can afford to leave stranded human assets as a result of this process. So we have been specifically careful in formulating our recommendation, paying attention to reskilling, skilling up, training, depending, of course, on the type of generations that we're facing, because the oil industry, or I mean, the traditional energy industry has to face that transition without leaving anybody out. And that needs to be done through reskilling of the actual STEM skill pool. And of course, there are challenges in terms of the new jobs that are being created by the new industry. So I would recommend, if I can, that everybody reads or pays attention to what the United Nations publishes as a policy brief number 13, which is basically linking how all these energy transitions do create jobs and do concentrate on how we can actually claim and be successful in not leaving anybody out. Of course, universities, of course, joint ventures among public and private, academia and industry partnerships, secondments. There are an enormous number of tools that can be applied and used in order to have a human-centered transition that doesn't really leave anybody behind and dares to be fair in all aspects.
Elena, thank you. You know, one of the perhaps a transversal element to the conversations here on the stage, it really is about people, and in some sense this could be, I don't want this to be taken as a negative, but I hope there's maybe some positive solution. So we talked about energy transitions, different energy matrices around the world, so everyone is not on the same starting point. One of the challenges in digitization, and we've heard a little bit about it earlier today, and of course this would have dramatic impact on energy systems, is that of around cyber and cybersecurity. Given the different places where all of our nations are in terms of your energy matrix, its sustainability, its resilience, how do we ensure, one, that these energy matrices are secure? And what are perhaps some of the key things we need to be doing to train people as they enter into this energy space to think non-traditionally or differently about their role in ensuring the resilience of the energy system, whether it's a microgrid or a large national system. So there's a lot of challenges there, and I'd be curious if anyone would like to comment on that.
Maybe I make a small comment. If we have sun power in the northwest, and now there is this Renovar initiative to get private investment in solar panels. Now then you have to transport 2,000 kilometers at the very least with the loss that represents. How about creating electricity, highly demanded industries locally? For instance, to make ammonia using the lithium or extracting lithium with electrochemical methods, or like we have in Patagonia, the Aluar aluminum plant. So instead of transporting in a country like Argentina, in a long country, thousands of kilometers, the electricity which comes from sun power, create locally. And this is the message for the politicians. They should understand. They should listen to people who have the knowledge in the engineering and in the science to localize industries where the energy sources are.
Jim, you want to tackle any of those issues?
Well, one issue which flows out of that is also where people want to live. And particularly if we look at what is necessary to establish a leading-edge technology plant, it will be reliant on the best of engineers and the social structure that can support a community of those people. And actually that's hard, because we find the younger generation particularly do not necessarily want to be where we might want them to be for reasons of economic development. So there are many levels to that problem. But to go back to the cybersecurity things, it was very revealing. We had a group of very 20-year-old electrical engineers and social scientists who looked at the issues around cybersecurity. And the first thing they say is, well, historically, we retrofit that into all of the systems we build. we build the systems, and then we think about how to make them secure. We are going to need to change the way we approach that problem to start with what constitutes the security of the system we need to design, and then design it on that basis.
Any other thoughts? Well, great. I want to thank the panel. You tackled a tremendously complex issue, and I think you gave our audience not only a wonderful opening macro snapshot, but very specific points that we can, I hope, take and learn from countries around the world.